September 11, The New Pearl Harbor is a 5-hour documentary that recaps 12 years of public debate on September 11. All the most important issues in the debate are presented in full detail, showing both the positions of those who reject the official version and the positions of those who support it, who call themselves debunkers. The top debunkers from Italy, France, and the United States, namely the authors of Popular Mechanics, have been chosen to represent their positions. They do so with their own voices, directly, using clips from public conferences, television debates, and documentaries. In recent years, this group of people has been asserting that all the major claims by the 9/11 Truth movement have been debunked and that the official version of September 11 is substantially sound and credible.
That is exactly how it should be done. Here's the claim, here's the answer. Here's the claim, here's the answer. By the end, they got nothing to stand on. Boom, end of story.
This film intends to prove that this is not true, and that in fact all the most important questions on September 11 still remain to be answered. The film contains 50 actual questions directed at the debunkers and anyone who supports the official version. Even though the film is aimed primarily at those who are not too familiar with the debate, it also contains some new findings which may be of interest to advanced researchers. The introduction presents 12 historic parallels between Pearl Harbor and September 11. Among these parallels, the fact that both administrations knew in advance that the attacks were underway, the fact that in both cases important information on the attacks was withheld from those who could have used it to defend the country, the fact that in both cases the defense was weakened below its requirements, and the fact that in both cases high-level orders were given which ended up facilitating the success of the attacks. The film proper is divided into 7 parts: the air defense, the hijackers, the airplanes, the Pentagon, Flight 93, the Twin Towers, and Building 7. Part 1 addresses the question of whether the air defense failure to intercept the 4 hijacked airplanes was accidental or intentional. The suspicion is not on the military apparatus as a whole, but on a few rogue elements within that apparatus who may have acted on their own agenda in order to delay and thwart the response by the air defense. At the same time, the so-called incompetence theory, which is the official explanation for this historic blunder by the air defense, is shown to be untenable for multiple reasons. Among those reasons, the argument by the debunkers that the military radar system was unprepared to deal with internal hijackings is shown to be a false argument. The argument by the debunkers that without transponders the plane became extremely difficult to track on radar is also shown to be false. Furthermore, the statement by the 9/11 Commission that the plane that hit the Pentagon traveled undetected for 36 minutes on a course due east for Washington, D.C. turns out to be false. The Secret Service has revealed that the plane was being observed on radar from the White House for at least 30 minutes before it reached the Capitol.
We knew there were 2 coming, one of them approximately 30 minutes out, one of them approximately 45 minutes out.
The real reason for the failure to intercept the hijacked airliners seems to have been the unusually high number of military exercises being run by NORAD on the morning of September 11. Not only did these exercises cause major confusion in the system, but they ended up taking away a large number of jets towards Canada and Alaska, while only 4 fighters remain on alert to defend the entire northeastern sector of the country.
I've determined, of course, that with only 4 aircraft, we cannot defend the whole northeastern United States.
As the hijackings were in progress, the military can be heard frantically looking for jets to be scrambled in their pursuit.
You're going to get 2 aircraft up in about 15 minutes.
Okay. Duluth, you got no fighters.
Syracuse 2 airborne in 20 minutes. The Alpena thing isn't what we thought.
Anybody in training, send them home. You got no weapons. They just went on straight around to the range. They blew all their load.
Given the multiple warnings received by the U.S. in the previous months, which specified possible hijackings of airliners to be used as weapons, the choice of scheduling so many exercises in one day while leaving only 4 jets on alert could have hardly been accidental. This raises the first question posed by the film.
Knowing that the attacks were imminent, knowing that they might involve hijacked airliners, but not knowing where and when they could happen, would have been a good reason to beef up the defense and keep even more jets than usual on alert all across the country. Why instead schedule so many exercises in one day while leaving only 4 jets on alert to defend the very sector of the country that was most likely to be attacked?
Regardless of the reasons for scheduling so many exercises in one day, a second problem remains. After it became clear that America was being attacked by hijacked airliners at 9:03, none of the top generals thought of immediately suspending the war games and recalling all the jets available to their bases.
You guys watching the news?
Yeah.
I wasn't sure. I've been watching it for about 10 minutes. They suspend the exercise?
Not at this time, no.
I hope they cancel the exercise because this is ridiculous.
But the exercises were not cancelled, as if it were in the United States that was under attack. This increased the confusion between real and simulated hijackings, while it delayed the return of the jets to their bases. This brings us to the second question.
After having realized that the country was being attacked by hijacked airplanes at 9:03, why didn't Eberhard immediately suspend all the war games and recall all the available jets to their bases? Why didn't Myers order him to do so after having been briefed by Eberhard on the ongoing attack?
It should be noted that NORAD suspended the war games only after all terrorist events had ended, which made the military transition to real world totally futile at that point. By the time dozens of armed jets started patrolling the skies, all commercial airliners had already been grounded.
The president finally returns to Washington. An escort of 6 helicopters was waiting for him. 300 fighters were defending the skies.
Had there been 300 fighters ready to defend the skies on the morning of September 11, would the terrorist attacks have turned out the same way?
To bring even more confusion into the situation was a long list of unexplained absences and last-minute substitutions with first-day rookies, which made it even harder for everyone involved to follow the established procedures. In particular, the unavailability of the Secretary of Defense in the most crucial hour of the day seems almost unthinkable for a country like the United States being under attack.
For 30 minutes, we couldn't find him.
Rumsfeld told the 9/11 Commission that he was just gaining situational awareness when he spoke with the Vice President at 10:39. That's more than 1.5 hours after the whole world knew that America was under attack.
General Eberhard, the man who could have stopped the war games with a simple phone call, also managed to put himself out of the loop for 30 minutes in the most crucial hour of the day.
Why would so many rookies be placed in key positions, and why would so many top officials be either absent or unavailable on a day when so many exercises were scheduled is a question that remains to be answered.
The problems do not rest with the military alone. The civilians across the river also seem to have some explaining to do. The NORAD tapes, released in 2007, have revealed that the White House had ground-to-air missiles of their own.
I just got a call from Washington. They said that if there's anything above their airspace, the Secret Service is going to free fire.
This sheds a whole new light on the infamous Mineta case. We already knew that Dick Cheney had issued an order relative to the plane approaching Washington that was suspected of being a stand-down order. Now we know that the White House could have stopped that plane if they wanted to, but for some reason they chose not to.
As the unknown airplane was approaching the protected airspace, it had no clearance from air traffic controllers, no radio communications active, and the transponder was off. This made it a perfect candidate for a shoot-down, especially after 2 towers in New York had already been hit by an airplane. Despite all this, no one moved a finger as the unknown threat kept rushing towards the Capitol.
The young man said, Vice President, the plane's 10 miles out. Do the orders still stand? And the Vice President sort of whipped his head around and said, of course they do.
9 miles from the White House, 8 miles from the White House, all the way down to 1 mile from the White House.
Undisturbed, the plane circled the White House and went on to strike the Pentagon, causing the death of at least 125 people between military and civilians on the ground. Question. The Secret Service knew about the incoming plane for the last 30 minutes, was following it on radar, had the means to shoot it down, and should have done so in order to protect the Capitol, but they didn't. Why?
Part 2 takes a closer look at the 19 alleged hijackers. The question here is twofold: whether they were actually capable of controlling the hijacked airliners and whether they were even on board of those planes to begin with. As far as their flying experience goes, it was remarkably poor. While they took some lessons in small single-engine airplanes, none of them had ever flown a jet in their life, let alone a large airliner, which is obviously a league of its own. In fact, at least 2 of the 4 were such poor pilots that their instructors would not allow them to fly solo in the same small airplanes they were training with. The debunkers have suggested that the hijackers didn't need to know how to take off or land, and that all they had to do in order to reach their targets was to set the autopilot. But this idea is quickly disproven. Steep ascents of 3,000 feet per minute, hair-raising plunges of 10,000 feet per minute, and other extreme maneuvers observed by the air traffic controllers categorically exclude that anyone with less than an exceptional experience with large airliners could have been at the controls.
That is absolutely unheard of for a commercial jet
In particular, several professional pilots have attested that the high-speed circular descending maneuver at the Pentagon, which included a very difficult approach near the ground, would have been unthinkable for an incompetent like Hani Anjour, who had never sat once in the cockpit of a 757 and was even known to have trouble controlling a Cessna 172. At the same time, the strike on the external ring of the Pentagon, which incidentally hit as far away as possible from the top brass officers, seems to have been expected among the high ranks of the military.
And he leaned in and he said, if I were you, I would stay off the E-ring, the outer ring of the Pentagon, the rest of the day, because we're next.
On the other hand, we should keep in mind that we have never seen a single image of the 19 terrorists at the 3 departing airports on the morning of September 11.
All major airports in the world have security cameras practically everywhere, covering every public area 24 hours a day. We should have dozens of images of the 19 terrorists standing in line for the check-in, getting their boarding passes, moving through the lounge areas, making phone calls, using stairs and conveyor belts, visiting the duty-free shops, or having a snack before departure. And then we should have seen the terrorists seated in the departure lounges, waiting for the boarding call, and finally proceeding through the gates that would take them to the airplanes. But we have never seen any of this.
The only images we have ever seen are a picture of 2 of the terrorists at a different airport, boarding a different flight earlier that day, and a video without a timestamp showing some of the terrorists at the Dulles airport, which could have been shot by anyone at any given time before September 11. But not one picture showing the 19 hijackers at the 3 departing airports on the morning of September 11 has ever been released in more than 12 years. And there's more.
We also don't have a single soundbite of their voices from the 4 cockpit voice recorders. With 4 hijackings that lasted between 18 and 41 minutes each, we should have some 2 hours of continuous recordings of what happened in the cockpits of the 4 airplanes. We should have heard the struggles of the terrorists storming in and overcoming the pilots. And then we should have heard their conversations in Arabic as they try to figure out where they are and how to get from there to their designated targets. But we never heard any of that.
In fact, the entire situation with the black boxes truly beggars belief. Out of the 4 black boxes from the 2 airplanes that hit the Twin Towers, we are told that not one was found. In the months following the attacks, every ounce of rubble that left Ground Zero was meticulously combed through several times by different teams in search of the smallest human remains. Yet we are asked to believe that these 4 bright orange, practically indestructible devices were never found. The contents of 1 black box from the Pentagon and 1 from Shanksville were never released with dubious justifications. For the remaining 2 black boxes, the data was released, but the serial numbers from the 2 devices were not. Even when researchers filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the serial numbers, it was denied. This means the 2 black boxes cannot be matched to the planes they were mounted on, and their data cannot be verified as genuine. On a day of historic importance like September 11, not one bit of verifiable information has ever been released from 8 black boxes out of 8.
As far as we know, the 4 airplanes that crashed on September 11 could have been totally different machines from those that left the airports earlier that morning.
Part 3 addresses the logical consequences of Part 2. The fact that these 4 amateurs could not have flown the airplanes in the way they were flown, and that they probably weren't even on board, poses a big question. Who was piloting the planes? One thing we know for sure is that no professional pilot would ever crash his own airplane into an inhabited building like the Twin Towers.
I don't believe any airline pilot would intentionally fly into the World Trade Center, even with a gun at his head.
This leaves us with only a few possibilities, one of which was actually suggested by TV reporters less than 10 minutes after the second impact.
Ollie? Jim, what you're saying could be a drone aircraft. That's an aircraft that's guided electronically to its target without having a pilot. Now that is a possibility as well.
In support of this possibility are some exceptional performances displayed by the 4 airplanes in the final leg of their journey. In particular, what caught the eye is the fact that these airplanes flew near sea level at speeds far exceeding the maximum operating velocity of a regular airliner.
Each airplane has a specific maximum operating velocity called VMO, which should never be exceeded at low altitudes. Never means never for a reason. Should the VMO be exceeded, a phenomenon called flutter can occur, which can quickly cause irreversible damage.
For the 767s, 2 of the 4 hijacked airplanes, the VMO is 414 miles per hour. For the other two airplanes, the 757s, it's even less, 402 miles per hour. Yet, on the final part of the journey, the airplanes were clocked at speeds of 490 miles per hour, 586 miles per hour, 530 miles per hour, and 580 miles per hour. This is considered categorically impossible by professional pilots and aeronautical experts alike.
Is it possible to fly over 500 miles an hour at sea level?
No. It would be greater than its maximum speed at sea level.
How do you feel about United 175 reaching 510 knots?
Physically impossible.
No, that's impossible. To do that at ground level, you need 6 times that amount of power. Those engines can't put out 6 times more power.
This opens up a new question. If those were not passenger planes but military drones, what happened to the passengers?
With certainty, no one can answer this question. One thing we do know, however, the CIA has been developing plans for covert operations that involve the in-flight swapping of commercial airliners with military drones since the 1960s. One such plan was called Operation Northwoods, and it detailed how to replace a civil airliner with a military drone in mid-air, unbeknownst to the air traffic controllers. After the swap, the airliner would be landed in a military base. The drone would continue to fly, appearing on radar as the original plane, and would be remotely guided all the way into the target.
We don't know whether this is the end the passengers met on September 11, but one important fact seems to point in that direction. The passengers who called their relatives from their cell phones could not have placed those calls from the airplanes in flight. The limited power of cellular phones would not have allowed a connection from cruising altitudes. This was confirmed by a hands-on experiment conducted by Japanese television, which showed that cell phones become totally useless beyond 10,000 feet.
And when the aircraft rose to 6,000 feet, Company A's phone also became useless. At 8,000 feet, none of the 3 cell phones worked anymore.
No service on A, no service on B, no service on C.
Airliners normally cruise at 30,000 feet and above. There's also a second problem that makes cell phone calls unthinkable from a cruising airplane, and that is speed.
The connection would continuously need to be transferred from one receiving station to the next, and then to the next, and again to the next. But the speed by which an airplane approaches and crosses over the handoff zone is so high that the towers wouldn't have the time to complete the handoff procedure. The call would be dropped, and the person would need to dial the number from scratch.
By cross-referencing the FBI reports on the cell phone calls received by the family members during the hijackings with the location, speed, and altitude of the planes at the time those calls were made, we can show that at least 7, if not all 9, cell phone calls reported by the FBI would not have been possible from the cruising airplanes. Someone has to explain where those calls were made from. The calls made with earphones also pose several problems. For example, the call passenger Todd Beamer made to an earphone operator during the hijack of Flight 93 remained open for at least 20 more minutes after the plane had crashed to the ground.
"We didn't lose a connection," stated Jefferson, "because there's a different sound that you use. I never lost connection. It just went silent."
Since earphones are powered by the same airplane's electrical system, it seems obvious that Todd Beamer could not have been calling from the airplane in flight. Part 4 addresses the Pentagon attack. At this point in the film, we have already established that there is no proof that the plane that appeared over Washington was in fact Flight 77. An accurate analysis of the damage, both outside and inside the building, shows that the Pentagon could not have been struck by a 757 in any case. In particular, the report by the American Society of Civil Engineers shows that the exit hole in the third ring of the Pentagon could not have been caused by the airplane. A visual analysis of the damage map of the ground floor can easily confirm that no substantive object of any kind could have traveled from the entry to the exit hole. This is the conclusion of the segment on the damage analysis.
In conclusion, we have an opening on the first floor that's a bit more than half the projected wingspan of a 757, the tip of the left wing and most of the right wing missing without a valid explanation, the horizontal stabilizers and the tail also missing without a valid explanation, a fuselage that behaved more like a warhead than an empty cylinder made with aluminum, no trace whatsoever of the core of the 2 engines, and an exit hole on the C-ring that no one can rationally explain. Given all these facts, we must conclude that the damage observed at the Pentagon is not compatible with and must have been created by something other than a Boeing 757.
Furthermore, a detailed technical analysis of the 2 videos of the impact taken from a Pentagon parking lot shows that the crucial frame, where the full body of the plane should have been visible, has been doctored in order to hide it.
If we now summarize the situation at the Pentagon, we have the total lack of evidence that the unknown incoming was in fact Flight 77, a mysterious phantom plane that attracted the attention in the opposite direction, the failure from the White House to shoot down the incoming even though it posed a serious and imminent threat, a totally illogical approach maneuver from a terrorist's point of view, an alleged hijacker incapable of performing that maneuver, the absence of any significant part of the plane from the wreckage, a damage to the building clearly incompatible with a 757, a doctored tape of the impact, and the obvious reluctance by the FBI to release any other tape that could allow the identification of the plane.
Part 5 addresses the crash of Flight 93. According to the official version, Flight 93 crashed in this open field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. But when the people living nearby arrived at the crash site, they didn't find what they expected.
Saw the fireball, and I get up there and I'm thinking, where is it? You know?
Nothing. It was just little pieces. There was nothing to actually, like a door or window or anything. You couldn't really. It was just little pieces of shrapnel everywhere.
It looked like someone had gouged about a 10-foot wide, 10-foot deep trough through the strip mine area. But when you looked in, it was just covered with dirt. There was nothing there that you could really say was an airplane.
The reason there are no recognizable parts, says the FBI, is because most of the plane ended up buried deep underground. So deep, in fact, that the black boxes were retrieved respectively at 12 and 25 feet below the surface. One doesn't have to be a dogged conspiracy theorist to doubt the story of Flight 93. The idea that a 100-ton airliner, including the cockpit, the fuselage, the wings, the passengers and their belongings, were almost completely swallowed by a hole in the ground that managed to close up on itself before anyone arrived, requires a level of credulity rarely found in adults. At the same time, the mushroom shape of the cloud, the absence of a thick plume of smoke underneath, which is typical in airplane crashes, and the unburned grass next to the hole strongly suggest that this was a bomb explosion, not a plane crash. Furthermore, debris from the plane found as far as 8 miles from the crash site in a day with practically no wind makes it extremely hard for anyone to maintain that the plane fell to the ground in one piece. In fact, the very idea that the passengers heroically sacrificed their lives in order to save more lives on the ground has been refuted by the 9/11 Commission. The passengers never even made it into the cockpit, wrote the Commission. It was the hijackers who chose to intentionally crash the plane for unclear reasons, even though they were only 20 minutes away from Washington, D.C.
If we now summarize Flight 93, we have no proof whatsoever that the terrorists boarded the plane, nor that they were ever in the cockpit. An alleged hijacker who could not have flown an airliner in the way that Flight 93 was flown. A false, concurrent hijacking that called the attention away from the real one. No proof whatsoever that Flight 93 crashed in the field near Shanksville. An extended debris field which flatly disproves the official version of the crash and suggests that the plane broke up in mid-air instead. An unexplained small white jet leaving the area right after the impact. And the fact that the passengers who called from their cell phones could not have been on that plane to begin with, which strongly suggests their revolt was a scripted, fictional event intended to fuel a prefabricated legend.
Part 6 deals with the destruction of the Twin Towers. The question is whether the two buildings collapsed due to the damage in the ensuing fires, or whether they were brought down intentionally by controlled demolitions. One thing most people don't know is that by the turn of the century, these buildings were no longer a desirable property in any way. They were obsolete, cumbersome white elephants that had lived well beyond their prime. Most importantly, the large amounts of asbestos the two buildings contained, in the fireproofing, the floor tiles, the pipings, the ceiling panels, the elevator shafts, had made it an ever-increasing problem that no one had been able to resolve.
Reportedly, by the year 2000, the Port Authority was looking at an asbestos abatement bill of as much as $1 billion, the same money it would have cost to build a brand new tower. Back in the 90s, the Port Authority had sued the insurance companies, trying to get them to cover the cost of the asbestos removal. But in May 2001, 4 months before the terrorist attack, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey lost their 10-year-old court battle. At that point, the Port Authority was between a rock and a hard place. The Twin Towers could no longer be maintained without incurring the cost of asbestos removal, yet they could not be demolished because of the large amounts of asbestos they contained.
This is why the solution of a private investor who seemed so enthusiastic about acquiring the Twin Towers at that point has raised serious suspicions on the true nature of the operation. And the fact that the new owner immediately took out a multi-billion-dollar insurance policy covering the Twin Towers in case of total destruction certainly hasn't helped dissipating those suspicions.
And then, just minutes later, received a telephone call to turn on a television set and witnessed this horrendous circumstance.
This is how, on the evening of September 11, Larry Silverstein found himself in control of some 12 million square feet of new office space to be built on some of the most valuable real estate in the world. In the meantime, all the asbestos from the Twin Towers has been inhaled by the citizens of downtown Manhattan, and especially by the first responders and volunteers who worked at Ground Zero, who are now being decimated by mesothelioma and other pulmonary diseases.
One event that has radically changed the landscape of the debate on the Twin Towers is the birth of an association of professionals in civil construction called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, founded in 2006 by San Francisco architect Richard Gage.
Since they've entered the fray, Architects and Engineers has brought to the table a solid amount of scientific information refuting the official explanation by NIST on the collapses and confirming the theory of controlled demolitions instead.
I certainly am much more open-minded about it than I was, and it is because of the involvement of the 9/11 families and all these engineers and architects. Clearly, they know more than I do.
The chapter on the Twin Towers is very long, and it presents each argument of the debate in full detail. This is the summary at the end of the chapter.
At this point, we can summarize the evidence for a gravitational collapse and compare it with the one for controlled demolitions. The official explanation for the initial collapse, or sagging trusses theory, is fundamentally flawed for at least 3 reasons. There is no evidence that the fireproofing was widely dislodged from the steel trusses, no evidence for temperatures high enough to seriously weaken the steel, and no valid explanation on how the trusses could have pulled and broken the external structure on their own. At the same time, the initial collapse is fully compatible with a controlled demolition. The official explanation for the total collapse of the Twin Towers does not exist, nor was a scientific calculation ever attempted by NIST, as they have repeatedly acknowledged. At the same time, the full collapse of the buildings is fully compatible with a controlled demolition. The vertical acceleration of the upper sections to near free-fall speed makes it impossible to explain the collapses by gravitation only, without violating at least 2 fundamental laws of physics. At the same time, the near free-fall acceleration achieved by the collapsing towers is fully compatible with a controlled demolition. The amount of witnesses who reported powerful explosions and the ensuing devastation in the Twin Towers is overwhelming. Such explosions cannot be explained by jet fuel alone, while they are fully compatible with a controlled demolition. The squibs observed 30 and 40 floors below the level of collapse cannot be explained by the air pressure in a gravitational collapse. At the same time, squibs are the typical signature of controlled demolitions. Not all the diagonal cuts and V-cuts observed on the columns at Ground Zero can be explained by the removal operations. At the same time, these kind of cuts are another typical signature of controlled demolitions. The large area of debris around the towers, with the lateral ejection of elements weighing several tons, cannot be explained by a gravitational collapse. At the same time, these ejections are fully compatible with the use of powerful explosives. The long-lasting fires, the extreme temperatures under the rubble, the incandescent beams extracted during the cleanup, the high degree of deformation of massive steel beams, the molten steel and molten concrete observed and found at Ground Zero cannot be explained by jet fuel alone, nor by regular office fires. Highly effective destructive devices capable of developing extremely high temperatures must have been used as part of a controlled demolition. The almost complete pulverization of the contents of both towers, from the concrete floors to the office furnishings to the actual vaporization of victims' bodies, cannot be explained by a simple gravitational collapse. At the same time, these results are fully compatible with the presence of powerful explosives, such as those used in controlled demolitions. Unless a comprehensive, scientifically sound explanation for all the phenomena observed is presented, the only conclusion available is that the Twin Towers were brought down by some form of controlled demolition.
Part 7 covers the destruction of Building 7, which took place in the afternoon of September 11. The official theory by NIST of a collapse due to fire, which would have been an absolute first in history, is shown to be untenable for several reasons. At the same time, the theory of a controlled demolition is confirmed by multiple, easily verifiable evidence. In fact, once Architects and Engineers forced NIST to admit the free fall of the upper section of the building for 1/3 of the global collapse, the debate on Building 7 was sealed.
That evidence alone would indicate that the official story doesn't hold water.
At the end of the day, this film confirms that every major aspect of the official version of September 11 does not stand to scrutiny, and that a new and truly independent investigation is urgently needed in order to clarify all the dark areas of this fateful event.
This brings us to the last question, which is not only for the debunkers, but for anyone who cares about freedom, democracy, and an honest government. If you were aware of solid evidence disproving the official version and suggesting the involvement of some rogue elements of the government in the terrorist attacks, would it be more unpatriotic and anti-American to ask for a new investigation, or to turn a blind eye to it and pretend such evidence doesn't exist? Given that the people's trust in institutions is of paramount importance for a nation's well-being, would that trust be better served by denying the evidence of a conspiracy, or by bringing those suspected to accountability in a court of law?